Hey everybody, I'm Jody Vance.
And I'm George Affleck.
And it is time for...
Oh, Canada. UnSpun.
Indeed, our Canada Day UnSpun is underway. Are you ready for the long weekend?
I got my red shirt on for the big Canada Day episode. That's all I got this week.
That's not all you got. You're looking fresh. You got the new glasses going.
Yeah.
Straight away.
I vigorously cleaned my other ones too vigorously. I was like, snap, but they snapped into pieces, and so I had to get some new ones. Yes, new nerd.
Looking fresh, looking sharp. I, on the other hand, am just held together by duct tape and chewing gum because I just got off the air. I did 3 hours of the Mike Smith show, so I feel like I've been through it and back, but I'm ready for UnSpun because I'm full of opinions and information. So first of all, before we carry too far beyond Canada Day, there was a good news story today from the P&E. I'm not sure if you heard.
I have not heard.
Okay, so the P&E, on the heels of doing that really cool thing with the mini donuts and then doing Barbecue for Dad, which was the drive-through barbecue, and then the car show that you drove around the floor of the Pacific Coliseum. Very cool. A bunch of us were involved in taking part in that, and it was really super. It just felt good. And now they're looking at, on Canada Day, so hopefully you're watching this before Canada Day, you can take part in a parade. You can dress up your car and parade through the P&E grounds, and there will be some food trucks where you can order in advance, so everything's, public health, right? Safe. And then also in July, they're looking at opening safely Playland. There'll be 12 rides, right? Isn't this great?
Because I have a tradition on Father's Day, we usually go to Playland, and now last year it rained out, and this year no Playland. So, parade. I'm not a big fan of parades in general as an adult, but as a kid, my dad had a convertible in the 70s, and we lived in North End and then Langley, and we were always being asked if they could use our car for parades. And the best part of it was I got to sit in the front seat whenever our car was used. And so I'd be in this front seat for whatever was going on in the back. And I'd be like waving. I was like 7 it was like the coolest thing to be in a parade. So yeah, that was the funnest thing when I was a kid, to have that convertible and be in parades.
I love that. So I wanted to start with a little bit of Canada Day good news, because we're going to flip to one of the tougher days for our Prime Minister with regard to taking a stand for Canada, with some significant names, former diplomats and former politicians putting their names on a letter asking him to resolve the Meng Wanzhou issue of the extradition proceedings and really wanting to end this political standoff with China. Your thoughts?
He went tough today. I know that Brad Zubik, who's pretty prolific on Twitter, if anybody doesn't follow Brad, he's always been pushing hard that the Prime Minister needs to take a harder stance against China and these prisoners, and that this is a negotiation this is not about anything else but getting these guys out, and there should be no relationship between the person that we're holding in Canada and the people they're holding in China. And for the first time, he really came out hard on that issue today. And of course, Brad immediately online said, I wonder if his polling showed him that this is something that Canadians want him to do. Or was it just instinctive? I mean, that's always the question you ask with politicians. Is it polling, or is it instincts, or is it a bit of both? So he came out hard. He said, this is not a negotiation. I am not interested. This would put people's lives in danger anywhere around the world, where you become basically a tool for terrorists, for whoever who want to kidnap, if they know they can negotiate this kind of stuff. So he said, absolutely not. There's no relationship between these two things, and we want these guys to come home, and that's that.
Using diplomatic channels in order to negotiate their release is the way that Justin Trudeau is moving forward. When asked and challenged multiple times this morning in his briefing in front of Rideau Cottage, the first time was more political in how he said it. The second time he was also quite specific with his words, and the third time he's like, they're just wrong. Like it really felt like he went, you know what, enough.
Yeah.
No. We're not doing that. We're not going to give in to the strong arm tactics of this massive communist regime that could then, anytime they want to manipulate us as a country, they just scoop up a couple of our citizens and throw them in a cell. And this is a precedent. And I feel for the families of the two Michaels.
Oh my God,
I can't even imagine. Totally.
Like, this is the ultimate challenge of a you look at Jimmy Carter back in the 70s. It was his downfall. because he was trying to negotiate these prisoners out of Iran, and of course the day after he's out, I think it was on Inauguration Day for Reagan, they were released and in Iran, and it was just a kick in the face for him. But he was not willing to do that kind of negotiation for with terrorists, basically, and you know that
mostly political,
yeah. But the emotion for a politician with any kind of heart is huge. I mean, you know what you're doing. You know that you're putting people's lives in danger. I mean, these two Michaels, no doubt, are not living in the best of circumstances, for sure.
And 500 days and counting, right?
Like, we don't even know what it's like for them. We don't know anything. It's brutal.
No, and the little that we do know, that they don't have any supports, they don't have legal counsel, they've been charged with espionage, they're living in isolated cells where the lights are on 24/7. Like, it's horrific. However, the manipulation piece, I mean, we have to trust that the diplomats involved in this will somehow find a way to work through this without giving in to that regime. I also want to talk a little bit about some of the things that Justin Trudeau, our Prime Minister, was mentioning this morning with regard to supports for students, specifically trying to find a way for graduates coming into the workforce, because there are no jobs. Like, so they're trying to stimulate jobs. And I thought it was kind of an interesting move. And I don't know all the details of it because I'm a layman when it comes to these economic supports or relief, but to help a small business by giving them a grant that would be able to pay for that student to come and intern or use their degree as a novice to work with the small business. I did have a government grant to go to culinary school. It helped me immensely. There's no way our family would have been able to afford Pierre de Breuil Culinary Academy, in 1986. But I did it on a government grant. And so I kind of get, like, these
those still
really
exist.
significantly
Those grants
help.
still exist.
Yeah.
This is very specific to COVID, and to that, and to working within that volunteering related to COVID stuff. It's not a lot of money. I think what's interesting, and I think the CERB stuff as well, is the perception of the economy and what's happening in every part of this country, and decisions that are being made now by Trudeau that are his perception of the world right now is from Ontario and Quebec, whereas we're here in BC and we feel like we're in phase 3 now. Yeah. And so you look at these decisions and these kinds of things that they're looking at spending money on, and you're going, well, extending CERB, extending this and that. And we're obviously not out of the woods yet, but there is a feeling of hope here in BC now because of the numbers. So I think there's an interesting disconnect right now federally to what's happening in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, where we are all pretty much in phase 2 or 3 of getting out of the pandemic. And I think it's interesting to see the decisions being made, which of course makes sense. It's the most populous part of the country, Ontario and Quebec, but the perception of that. And so the student grant program is, and the CERB for young people, is certainly based on, I think, the perception of what's going on in Ontario and Quebec, which is still in major, serious state of concern.
Lockdown.
Still locked down.
Lower down. Yeah. Gentler, trying to get it under control where we're trying to open up with control. What I find interesting with the CERB and those I've spoken to and trying to rehire staff, we've got a lot of friends in the restaurant industry, we've got a lot of friends in the tourism and service industry, and trying to hire back people. And they're like, I can't. I'm not going to come back to work and maybe make what I'd make on the CERB. I think for the provinces who are opening up, if it's going to cost the government, the federal government, this amount of money for the CERB anyway, why not move the threshold for earnings while still collecting the CERB up a little bit?
Yeah, it's 1,000 right now, right? You're allowed to make an extra $1,000, so $3,000 a month. Although that's $36,000 a year based on that. If for somebody who's in their early 20s who lives outside downtown Vancouver, it's not bad, but
Vancouver.
It's only for a couple of months and then the CERB will be gone. So I saw some story about some breweries that were having challenges finding staff.
Calvin, calm down. Sorry.
Calvin, get Hobbs in there and say
working from home. Calvin, come here.
So I think it's interesting, and I think obviously we don't know the financial impact yet. We're waiting to hear from the province. How many hundreds of millions of dollars are we in the hole here? 50 million, 200 million, 600 million, billion.
You don't even know. Like, if this goes on for 18, 24 months or longer, we have no concept of how far in the hole we're going to go. And losing the AAA credit rating as a nation, that was announced today. BC probably standing on the precipice of the same. But at the same time, what's option B? Like really, what's option B here? And that's one of the things that makes me realize the severity of what we're living right now. When people want to say it's all a hoax, they're just trying to control, and then it's like, no. They don't start lining your bank account with money to keep you going when it's just a hoax to control.
Yeah, no, and losing your credit rating really impacts the cost of paying back. It increases your cost of paying back the debt. So that's the challenge with losing your credit rating. So
exactly. Again, though, but plan B, there isn't one. Plan B on a pandemic, we don't have one. We do have phase 3. We do have Dr. Bonnie Henry. We do have Health Minister Adrian Dix, who I interviewed today, actually. We talked a lot because the breaking news story today, like just as I was talking to Minister Dix, was Richard Zussman put out the tweet about the NHL, because we've been talking about, we're the hub city. This is going to happen, because why wouldn't you do it in BC? Why wouldn't you do it in BC? Because if somebody tests positive on that team, as Richard pointed out, what if it's Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final in Vancouver and the star goalie gets COVID-19? What then? What do you do?
Well, if it's the Canucks, it's so predictable. That would be exactly what would happen to the Canucks. But it's the way we ride.
Oh my God.
No,
COVID jokes with George.
And I'm not even a real, I don't know much about hockey, but I admit it. But I know that there is this, I mean, I think if you're in America right now, you're looking at Canada in general going, well, no, anywhere is better than America as far as the volume of people getting COVID. But what they're also saying is, okay, you know what, BC, you're a little too strict. You're asking too much. And basically, and I heard the Premier was on CME this morning, and you had the Minister of Health, and they're basically saying, too bad, where we are because of our process and the way we did things, and we're not willing to budge for a hockey game or a bunch of hockey games. So, I think
I love hockey. 17 years full-time sportscaster. Hockey is, especially in the playoffs.
Hockey's the one with a puck, right?
Yes. Anything in the playoffs, though, George. Anything in the playoffs. But this, no. I don't want one rule bent for it to be played here, because there is no reason for our city to have it. No spectators, no events in and around. You still can't gather more than, well, you shouldn't have more than 10 people, never mind 50 people. But there's so much about this that we can enjoy it from afar. What were you saying, that like the overhead beauty shot of the city?
Yeah, that's what the TV commercial, the advertising you get from. But here's my challenge to make it better: is Vancouver has to just win the Stanley Cup, and then we'll all be happy. So just do that. Just do that.
Okay, so wherever it's played, Canucks
doesn't
win.
Matter. Yeah. Doesn't matter. Okay. Just win the Stanley Cup for once. For once.
We're all feeling a little bit. 1915. We all feel a little bit better.
Millionaires.
I know. Well, it's true though. Dr. Bonnie Henry and Adrian Dix, and then Premier John Horgan, of course, making the announcement we're going to phase 3. Interesting. Finally, all of those people that were already traveling around the province and ignoring the health orders, now you can feel less guilty, and the rest of us can actually do it with a good, clean conscience while taking whatever we need with us if we're going to a smaller community, so we don't interrupt the supply chain for these places and spaces, and make sure we're welcome there. That's another sort of caveat. Did you book anything?
I did. I booked last week. I rolled the dice and booked a place in Penticton for a few days, just for the kids and us, just to go there. When you travel with kids, though, you do bring everything anyways, right? I mean, you can't. You bring half your house with you when you got kids.
That's right. You got the charger, right, Dad?
Yeah, you got the charger. Yes. You got this thing. What is this thing? Funny story. We actually, when I was a kid, we moved in 1967. My parents decided to move back east, and we took everybody, including my grandmother, who was in her probably late 60s at that time. And we had this station wagon. We're driving across Canada. And literally, we couldn't get up a hill somewhere. I think it was in Golden or somewhere, and the car just couldn't get up the hill. And my dad said, "We got to get rid of this. This is a true story. Got to get rid of the weight." And it's not going to be my grandmother, but he went through it and started taking the stuff out of the back. And my grandmother had brought plates like her china and her cutlery sets, and literally my dad is like taking the stuff and throwing it into a river, saying, "You're not bringing this. You got to get up this hill." Nope. She's like, "My family china."
Oh no, but what are you doing? What are you doing, Grandma? What are you doing? Speaking of what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk municipal politics for a sec?
Oh, we're bringing it home. For those people who think we talk too much about other stuff besides municipal, we're coming home now.
We're coming home now, and we're going to start with one that really is upsetting. And we can hit it, and then we can move on from it, because there is a counselor or school trustee, school board trustee, who's stepped in it in a big way. Apologized, but explain the story for
Fraser Ballantyne, who is with the NPA, which is the party I was with, they were having a discussion about police at schools, basically, and saying they want to have a process, or should we have these? And, the decision unanimously in the end was to review it and then come back with a report. So,
school liaison officers.
Yeah. So within the conversation, Fraser said, a bunch of things. He was asking some questions, making some points, and he talked about Caucasians in the Vancouver school system. And Fraser, nice guy, former principal in Vancouver, Caucasian, said that there are more, in many schools, there are more, that Caucasians are, he said, the minority, and they should be listened to, I think is the quote that he said to somebody, and then he said some other things after that, but that was basically captured and put out there, and now it's been a news story, and it is one of those brutal kinds of things that as a Caucasian male, and your column this week kind of touches on a lot of this, is it's really, you can't say that stuff. And
check your privilege. Check your privilege. That is how I feel when I listen to this, and it's difficult for you to even talk through it. Difficult for the two of us to talk through it. We're a couple of middle-aged white people. We don't have a whole lot of business in having perspective on racist views. What we do need to do is listen, and it feels like anyone who might say something similar to what Fraser Ballantyne said isn't doing enough listening, and he has apologized. He very unreservedly apologized, tried to put it into some kind of context a bit, and then was like, but overall, this is one of those moments. This is the moment where there's no qualifying anything anymore when it comes to explaining away white privilege. There's just not. And I will mention my column, because it's still resonating really deeply with me, obviously, because I interviewed George Larocque, former NHLer, author, former politician as well, but he is just this eloquent, unapologetically open, transparent, and honest Black man who is talking about the issues at hand here in such a clear way. And I really, I found it uncomfortable and yet enlightening in such a huge way to check my privilege and just listen to George. And some of the messages that he sent to me, and when I wrote the column, to be honest, I sent it in to McLean Kay, our editor, and he sent back, he's like, what about, and McLean doesn't often do this, he's like, what about this and this and this? And I realized I hadn't put in those pieces because the interview was 20 minutes long and my column's not 20 minutes long, it's 3 minutes long. So I went back and I made sure that those answers to the questions that McLean, he challenged me on a couple of things, like, did he mention this and that? So I implore people to have a read of it and maybe follow George Larocque on social media to see and hear his voice. It's time for us to listen to specifically Black people in our community, in our society, because the voices aren't as loud as they should be. And you and I were talking about, we both watched Colbert, right?
Stephen Colbert interviewing Jon Stewart last night. So it'll be the Wednesday night of the 24th of June.
Yeah.
I would suggest you watch it. It was very interesting. Obviously two white guys, but it was interesting, obviously from their perspective and in the line with what you're saying in your column. And Jon Stewart talked about equality versus equity. Very interesting. I won't get into it, but it's really worth listening to. And that reconciliation is a lot, in Canada, and certainly in my experience with politics in Vancouver and the conversations with First Nations, equality versus equity is a big part of it. How did we get here, and how do we get out of this, and how do we move forward, and all that has, a lot of it has to do with that. And I think that that's an interview or a conversation that they had. It was the entire show is worth watching. And I think that's certainly my job as a Caucasian male, is to listen, as you say, and learn.
As we check our privilege in having the conversation, it's like, let's take that closed-minded piece that has been our reality and broaden it out to involve all voices to be heard and really truly consume what's being said, as opposed to like compartmentalizing where things might fit into cliche old ways. I think that's let's leave it at that for there, because we've got a couple other things I want to get to here. The Pete Fry motion that was a stalemate in city council where the mayor was not available to vote, wasn't there that day. Councillor Dominato brought it back to the table. We're talking about the motion to loosen up the laws surrounding alcoholic beverage consumption in public places and spaces, not parks, city-owned, right?
Yes. So Lisa brought it back, which is that you're permitted to do. You can't, and there's ways you can rewrite a motion, because there's a second motion. I'm not sure what happened with it. I think it's still floating out there, that Melissa DeGenova and Sarah Kirby-Young brought back that was kind of similar, but the redo of the motion from Pete was brought forward first. It was it was a revote basically. And it passed. So it's interesting, thank goodness. I mean, something you and I have been talking a lot about. It certainly helps in a lot of these small businesses, restaurants, all that kind of stuff. And what's interesting about it is that they've tasked the staff to say where. And I bet, how do you decide where? Really, it's just like, why not? Because you don't want to kind of ghettoize locations or make these
party zones.
Yeah. So everybody's
going to go there now.
I know. I would bet the staff are kind of thinking, how do we bring it back to just as a bylaw at the next council meeting, saying just everywhere.
And put time constraints on it, right? Let's not make it go to 1 a.m. Absolutely. Have it around, realistic. You're going to have maybe a glass of wine with your lunch for your takeout with your friends at the beach, or not the beach. City-owned space.
I know. This is the thing, though. So Park Board still behind on this one, and they're waiting for their report. Whatever that was, I got to come in 2030. I don't even know. I mean, what's going to happen now? So the city approves this, and and then we have a bylaw where you can drink around the city, just like everybody smokes pot and does all the other things around the city. Now
you said that on the air the other day. Everybody, because I got inundated with people. Don't you know how alcohol causes cancer, and how do you expect people to get back to when they're sitting outside in a public space? How are they going to get home? They're going to drive, and they've had something to drink. And I'm like, well, I'm typing back. They've also had a drink at the restaurant or at the sporting event or whatever.
Weird to me.
Like, it is a really odd.
But what is the park board going to do, though? We're going to be walking into a park now, and if you've got a beer that you're allowed to drink in city streets, the park board's going to go, guzzle that, will you? Suck that back before you come into our park.
Because you didn't buy it at one of our closed concession stands.
Well, they're not even closed. They're still closed. I know. And they only,
I know, we can't. Let's go to another that because we're low on time and hot on conversation. I want to talk a little bit about the Surrey City Councillor says Surrey citizens want to be taxed more, and I'm like, what? On the Linda Steele show that came out, right?
I know. She said this, that she says she's talked to people who are okay with increasing taxes to pay for things. And Adrian Carr has said the exact same thing. And when I was in council, in fact, the first debate I was ever in politics, before I was elected, and she and I were in a panel, and she said that, and she said, I think people are willing to take, and I'm like, what? And so she said that, I think, many times in council. And I think Pete Fry has said something that too. The Green Party seems to be, said that taxation is that we are undertaxed in Vancouver. That is a message. Certainly a vision used to say that we are undertaxed and that we could be taxed more, that our property taxes are low. That argument's always being made. Our property taxes are low. And the whole cup of coffee.
I heard Tom Davidoff has said that.
Yeah,
and he references the U.S. Yeah, the U.S. versus Canada.
Remember that argument? It's the same thing. So I'm sure.
I got my property tax bill, George. It's more than a cup of coffee.
But I got good news.
Okay.
Businesses' taxes are down because of that. So you got your residential taxes are going up depending on various things, but business taxes are going down because of the tax shift thanks to the NPA. I
will take that hit for small business. I don't want to be taxed more, But if it means that the businesses in and around my neighborhood,
thousands of dollars for my business, thousands and thousands of dollars per year.
Good. So, okay, one more topic before we go. One more quick one, because the summer session at the BC Ledge kicked off this week. And I've been doing a lot of sort of intel and watching things unfold and speaking with people. I spoke with Mike Farnworth and just was like, how did you put this all together? And there's only allowed to be 24 people in the Ledge, but there's 87 members. I'm like, how does that work? So they're all on Zoom.
Zoom, like this. It works. And yet you go to city council and they still haven't figured out how to do their stupid meetings. I mean, like, what are you? It's the audio. They're breaking up. The other day I was watching and it's like, hello, can you hear me?
It's unwatchable. It's unlistenable.
It's brutal. It's brutal.
In 2020 with all the technology, like what? Do they not want people tuning in?
That's what that's the leap that I'm making. I mean, come on. Don't give me because the legislature has another video audio system that they use on a regular basis, but they decided to use Zoom as an alternative because it's easier and people understand it because we're all using it now. So what are you doing, Vancouver? Come on, get with it.
I had someone, I know, right? I had somebody say that Speaker of the House, Darryl Plecas, who, if you're watching this right now.
Remember that story?
Yeah. Remember when that was a big deal for ages? No, he's actually coming on the show with me tomorrow morning to talk about the first week of the legislature, but he doesn't like the back and forth, like argumentative question period, but now he can just mute. Kind of like you did when we were trying to connect today, when you're like, can you hear me now? And I'm like, no.
Or they actually did that to me in council. Gregor would all turn my mic off when I was going on a rant. So, the speaker can do that, but anytime. But yeah, to turn off the video or whatever, that's brutal. But anyways, democracy, it's ugly, but it's fun and it's needed. And you need to be visible. You need to be, the people need to be able to see what you're doing. And right now in the city of Vancouver, you can't see what they're doing. Literally.
I'm going to cap things off today, if I can embody my Dr. Bonnie Henry just for a moment. As we open up to phase 3, got a lot of people sending me emails talking about how things are all over and we're all back to normal here. We're not. Absolutely everything we've been doing in British Columbia needs to remain in place as we gently move forward and open up. The rules are as follows. Wash your hands. If you're sick, stay home. Keep a physical, keep a physical distance of 2 meters between you and anyone outside your bubble. Even if you're having a physical distancing drink in your own backyard, you have to keep that 2 meter distance. If you are incapable of keeping a 2 meter distance, please wear a mask. It is the single simplest act of kindness that you can do for your community, is to wear some sort of barrier. Here we are, in this great flattened curve. And me as a very proud British Columbian, I really hope this message resonates with people listening and that you share the message. I've got a lot of friends of mine that I find it very difficult to have conversations with right now because they want to tell me how they're going out for dinner. We should all go out and 10 of us should go and let's go dancing. And it's like, no.
Okay. I don't know the dancing part, but okay.
Right. But there's this sort of like, okay, everybody wants this to be over. Everybody. Mm-hmm. It's not over.
Got it.
I just wanted to punctuation.
On that note.
See ya.
Bye.
Wash your hands now, George. Wash it.